Alright boys, so we have a pretty massive undertaking in today's video. In today's video, as you can see up here, we're going to be doing the gold extra class servant video. The only servants that are not going to be ranked in this video are the free-to-play servants because I've already done a free-to-play tier list. If you want to check that out, feel free to go watch that. But I don't want to waste too much time right now because we have 39 different servants to rank. I even had to go write notes for all of these servants. I have them pulled up to the side over here because I didn't want to forget anything. I was like, when I saw there were 39 different servants that fall into this tier list, I was like, dude, I'm going to take notes because otherwise I'm going to forget like little minutia abilities that these different random servants have, because a lot of these servants you probably don't even use. You probably forgot what like a lot of these people even do, right? Like, can anybody even tell me what Gorgon actually does? Can you actually tell me things that Sherlock does? Has anybody used Abigail since she first came out? A lot of that weird stuff. It's just like, oh, this servant's a lot better than I thought, or I didn't even know this servant got a buff. Like, I completely forgot about that. So yeah, all of that aside, I am also going to be giving every servant a letter grade. Now, I'm using the fate parameter style of grading things, where it's like, obviously you can have like an A tier, an S tier, all that good stuff, but maybe a servant might be ranked as a B+, and what that means is that I think they're consistently a B tier servant, but that plus means I can see an argument for them being like low A tier, or if they're A+, I'm like, they're a really strong A tier servant, and I can see the argument for them being an S tier, but I'm going to put them in A tier just to be a little conservative. So with all that being said, just grab some popcorn, get comfortable in your seat. If you're going to work, this is going to be a nice chunky video for you to listen to, and I hope you guys enjoy. So let's just go ahead and dive right into this video. Starting off with the girl Jeanne. Now, Jeanne is going to be going in B+. Now, why is Jeanne going in B+? Because, for one, she has an insanely powerful NP that gives a party-wide debuff cleanse. It gives you, like, a nice heal every turn, and then, more importantly, it gives you some party-wide invincibility. This is also why you can kind of get away with doing some solo strategies for Jeanne, which used to be really slow, but because of her recent skill buff, where she can now reduce the enemy's defense massively by 50% for the initial turn, and then 30% for the next 2 turns, she's actually becoming a bit of a better soloer, especially if you're going to have her fight enemy servants, because she has a 120% chance to bound a servant. Now, that's actually different than stunning an enemy servant, because stuns have to go through debuff immunity, and they get checked by a lot of different passive buffs that a servant might have, but bound is basically like a higher tier stun that kind of just avoids all of that entirely. So basically, if you pop this on a servant, you're almost going to guarantee and get that. Now, the only real unfortunate things that I think are a little weak on Jeanne is that she gives a little bit of stars per turn. I think that could be bumped up a little bit. I think you could also increase her ability to neuter the enemy party, because she's lowering their enemy NP damage by a pretty decent amount. But let's also see like maybe an attack buff thrown in there, because when you can lower the enemy's attack and NP damage, then you start getting to like Nightingale territory, where you can actually just start face tanking enemy NPs, which is insanely powerful. Because while Jeanne is pretty good for soloing, having that extra layer of insurance, which I think the bound is that extra layer of insurance that she has right now, because if you miss an NP and you're not invincible for that turn, you can at least try to hit him with a stun. I think just getting an additional layer, if you want to use her as a solo servant, is very strong, and then it also makes her really strong as a party support type servant. So for both styles of gameplay, I think those are the right way to go in buffing up Jeanne, but she's definitely insanely powerful, and I definitely don't mind putting her up at B+. Amakusa, on the other hand, funny how both of these servants come from Apocrypha, and I just think Amakusa is an absolute S-tier god. Now, what doesn't this guy do very well? I mean, his NP is absolutely broken because it removes all enemy buffs, because it's an AoE NP. Before he actually does damage, he can refund a bit of stars like Jeanne, but then he also targets a specific ally and buffs their NP gain. He can reduce an enemy's NP gauge and then lower all enemies' buster resistance by 20% for 5 turns, which is absolutely insane. Then he has a 20% battery plus, giving himself 20% NP every single turn. He has the same bound skill as Jeanne, although his is slightly not as strong because this is a 100% chance while hers is 120. But then he also gives himself a 30% buster buff for 3 turns. Like, this guy just makes me cry because I want him to not be a ruler, because if he just had like some type of super effective like class advantage against somebody or some special damage mod, I think he would literally be a perfect servant. So even though I have him in S tier, the only thing I could ask for this guy is like give him something to kind of offset his ruler class, because obviously rulers aren't the best for, you know, fighting enemy servants, because they only have advantage against Moon Cancer, which you never really fight Moon Cancer. Like, I barely even count that as being super effective against somebody, because they're just so uncommon to fight. And then, sure, you can bring him against Berserkers, but Berserkers also hit you for super effective damage, which is the whole point of using a ruler, is that they're super tanky against all the other classes. So just give him like a special damage mod. I don't even care. Like against demonic enemies, I don't know, maybe you could do something with Vlad. Like Vlad technically is a vampire, counts as a demon, right? Maybe give him that. There's a fair bit of demonic servants and demonic enemies. I think that'd be a supreme buff for our boy Amakusa over here. Like, even just like 50% for 3 turns, I'll definitely take it. Like, just give me something, right? But yeah, he's definitely pretty exceptional. On the other hand, we have Martha. Now, Martha is a servant I was actually going to put in C+, and I may still do that towards the end here, but right now I currently have her at B-, because she can actually do some pretty decent damage with her NP. She also does get the buff of reducing the enemy's defense before doing damage, which isn't all that common actually, because there's a lot of servants on this list that reduce enemy defense specifically on their NP, but they don't actually do it before they do damage, which is supposed to mean their follow-up attacks do good, but this actually allows her NP to also be a part of that damage chain and doing extra damage. The fact that she has a free 30% battery as an old servant is very strong, especially because, as you guys know, having a 30% battery while we have a pen skills basically means you have like this fake 50% battery. And even if you're not going to use Martha for farming, this means in like challenge quests you can use her with a variety of different 50% starting charge CEs. And as a buster servant, I mean, you have access to her own, the aerial drive CE, you have the Jalter drinking CE, you have the Ishtar Christmas CE. All of these CEs are very, very strong with buster servants, and they all have a 50% battery coming with them, so it's very strong. If you can get her on a waterside battlefield, she gets an additional 20% attack buff for 3 turns, which is also really nice. She has a pretty decent heal and an instance of debuff immunity, so that kind of keeps her in the fight and lets her get around being stunned or charmed or anything. And then the real thing that kind of kicked her up into B tier, and why I'm confident saying that she could be B-, is that she has a nice net of special damage mod, because for 1 turn, if she's fighting a demon, divine, or undead opponent, she gets 100% special damage against them. Unfortunately, it's only for 1 turn, but I think it's just such a nice net of just different enemies that she can hit that it makes it worth putting her in B-, and it just makes her a pretty strong beat stick, right? With a little bit of survivability built in there and a little bit of utility with the 30% battery. So I think that's pretty good. Sherlock is going in A+. Now, this is what I'm kind of going back and forth on, because Sherlock is clearly a very broken servant. I mean, if you look at his NP, he gives the entire party Pierce Invincibility, Pierce Defense, 50% crit damage, and then lowers all enemies' defense by 30%. Basically, if Sherlock pumps his NP, you are obliterating the enemy party, because the only way realistically that they can hide from you is just by having solemn defense. Like, you just have to be fighting an enemy Astraea, which we still haven't fought anybody like that yet. So literally, Sherlock just allows you to obliterate the enemy party. But then, while I think that his skills are kind of the weaker part of his kit, his skills now actually kind of do contribute a bit now, because as a ruler, you know, he's pretty tanky, so he should be able to stick around for quite a while and continue to stack his NP and continue to give you those buffs. But he can also seal an enemy's NP for a turn, which gives him some utility. He can drop 20 stars, has his own star weight, and a fat arts mana burst, which, if you think about it, with his high NP gain, almost functions as a battery, because if you get Sherlock's arts cards while you can drop the stars, while you can have the star weight, and then the massive 50% arts buff to gas up his NP gain, if you fire that, you know, you're going to basically refund the entirety of your NP. So this kind of functions as a pseudo battery for him. He also has 3 turns of debuff immunity and a dodge to keep himself around if he already wasn't tanky enough as a ruler as is. And then finally, if you happen to be using him with art servants, they get a little bit of added utility, because he also can reduce an enemy's arts resistance by 20% for 3 turns. So it just makes him an overall really strong servant. And he's kind of like the arts crit support type servant that I've always wanted. Like, I know we have Caskill and Lan Ling, but they're not quite pushing in this broken, insane way, because I want them to have something broken to be able to like just allow arts crits teams to really pop off. And Sherlock is like right on that cusp. That's why I have him at A+, because I think you can make the argument just even based on his NP alone that he can go into S tier. He's very similar to someone like Van Gogh, which, you know, when we get to Van Gogh, it's like you barely have to talk about her NP because, or anything else, because her NP is just so broken. So Sherlock, I think you can make the argument for him being an S tier, but he's definitely just absolutely disgusting as is. Shi Huang, I mean, there's servants like this that, like, if they're this well known for how strong they are, just for the, like, you know, sake of time and, like, not wanting to be here for, like, an hour, I think I'm going to briefly go over him. I mean, I have notes on the dude, but you just got to know he's basically the best solo servant in the game. He does massive amounts of damage. He can crit really hard. He just has a ton of different ways of dealing with the enemy party, from stuns to being able to suck up their NP. The man's got a 50% battery to help him be consistent. I mean, the name of the game is just to obliterate your opponent and just take no damage, because this guy can loop his NP, you know, just with his own arts cards, and especially with his 50% battery, you know, his NP makes him invincible. So aside from some random enemy having Pierce invincibility, or if they have the ability to just constantly remove his debuffs, or not his debuffs, but his buffs, that's the only real thing that kind of gets in his way, but that also gets in the way of most solo servants anyway, so it's not really like a knock against him. But yeah, he's very well known and very deserving of the title of like basically being the best solo servant in the entire game, because he really just does all the things that you would want a solo servant to do. Astraea is another servant that I've kind of come around on just a little bit. Even though she's a ruler, like, I'm not a huge fan of DPS rulers because of their typing, as I said just a bit earlier with Amakusa, but I think, like, if Amakusa can kind of break the mold, then I'm kind of fine with Astraea also breaking the mold just a little bit, because if you look at her kit, she just does a lot of, like, really good generic things. I mean, her NP can do some very good damage with the evil niche. That's a very broad buff. She also gets built-in Pierce invincibility, which is insanely nice on her NP, because if you don't know, that not only pierces invincibility, obviously, but it also pierces dodge as well for whatever reason. So it makes her NP very strong, because basically, unless the enemy just stacks a lot of defense, she's pretty much just always going to be smacking them in the face, and it's very nice for boss battles. And the one thing that I really do like is that her NP also drops 20 stars for herself, because as you guys know, arts cards don't have a value for genning stars. It is very hard to get your arts cards or your art servants to really function as strong arts crit servants, and usually have to support them with a lot of different other servants to make it possible. But Astraea has two different ways of giving herself stars, one from her NP, and then she can just drop 30 whenever she wants on a skill, and it makes her very strong. And if we look at some of just the other things that she can do for herself, I mean, you're probably going to use it on her, but she has this Omni buff where she can give any ally a 20% attack, defense, and NP gain buff for 3 turns. Again, probably just going to give it to herself to make her pretty strong. But yeah, like, it's just nice that she gets a very well-rounded skill. The NP gain especially is going to make her really make use of those arts crits and refunding her NP. But even if you're having trouble, she has a 20% battery, she has a 50% crit skill and star weight skill at the cost of 5 stars to really make those crits bite. The only unfortunate thing is that the arts buff that she does have is only 30% for 1 turn. Now, typically, if you're not aware, if you're going to have a 30% different card buff or something, usually they have those last for 3 turns as mana bursts that are about 50%. Those are the ones that typically only last for 1 turn or have some hit restriction on them. So it's a little unfortunate. I hope they buff that in the future to make it 30% for 3 turns, or maybe they even gas it up to 50% for 1 turn. Something like that would be absolutely amazing. But Astraea is really good as an arts crit ruler. You have Ruler Artoria, who I'm also comfortable putting in A tier as well, because, I mean, she just does a lot, right? Like, she's very good offensively, and then she's very good for the utility that she actually gives to the entire party. Her NP pierces defense and refunds 20% NP to herself as a buster servant. That actually does help her if you want to use her in the Koyanskaya meta, and her ability to loop her NP. That actually does come in clutch a lot of times. And then she also has this ability to give herself an Omni card buff for that turn, which is very nice because, you know, Ruler Artoria's thing is that she can use like all the cards. I think, actually, interestingly enough, I think in the future they really should give her a buff where she can change her card type with one of her different skills. I think that would be really cool and kind of match what she's kind of doing. But aside from that, She has a 40% battery, which is just slightly unfortunate that it's not 50%, but because of the 20% on our own NP, you can make it work, especially with like an append skill or something. So you can definitely get her to work. It's not as bad as we, initially thought it was going to be, especially, with the other things she's able to do. She has a delayed attack gimmick, kind of like Ishtar, except hers is only 30%, but it's kind of nice that it's there. She's a ruler, but she also has a dodge for 1 turn to give her some survivability, which is very nice. Then, obviously, she has the skill she's famous for, the shuffling card skill, that also gives the entire party 50% crit damage for 3 turns, which is no joke, because that's the same crit damage buff that someone like Voyager gives. I mean, so that you have a bit of a reference. It's very, very strong. And then she also buffs their NP gain by 30% for 1 turn, which is also really nice in helping your party stay a bit consistent. And then finally, if you're down on her first delayed attack buff, she also has a backup 40% attack buff that also lasts for 3 turns, and then has some really good star weight for that turn as well. So it just kind of makes her a bit more consistent. It's like, well, maybe if you're on a turn where you're down on your delayed gimmick, maybe your delay is going to be up next turn, you still at least have this 40% attack buff to rely on. So it just makes Ruler Artoria a very, very strong DPS servant overall. Himiko, I'm just gonna have to gas over a little bit because we just ain't got the time. But Himiko, if you guys don't know, she's basically like the premium buster support right now, with her ability to just like gas up the party's overcharge stages, just give massive amounts of crit damage, buster damage to anybody, turn herself into an insane buster crit servant with her 100% buster crit skill and buster star weight, demonic damage mod, just an additional 30% buster for herself. She can make herself invincible for a turn on top of being a ruler, so it means she's probably going to stick around. She's immune to poisons and curses, so she's not going to get slowly whittled down even in some of the hardest fights in the game, like the Serranos fight. It just makes her absolutely insane. I mean, I also didn't mention her charisma is insane because it's a 20% attack buff and then gives everybody 8-star refund every turn. So with Himiko, just one of them, you're refunding 24 stars per turn. It just 50% battery, everything. She's just really, really insane. I don't need to spend too much time actually gassing up Himiko because you guys know that Himiko is absolutely insane. Now, I did just do a video on Karen fairly recently, so I'll try to go over this one a bit quicker. But basically, she's got her buff. It allows her NP to do a lot more damage. Again, kind of what I want for someone like Shirou Amakusa, where she's able to do big boy damage against chaotic enemies. She also can hit them with buff block, which is also very, very nice, because I can really just help just rein in the power of a lot of different bosses you'll be fighting in the game. She's immune to terror and charm, which basically means she really can't be stunned, aside from just being like actual raw stunned. And then charm is just very nice if you're fighting, I don't know, someone like Kama or something. So that's also very nice. She has a built-in resistance to buster cards. And then she just has like 70 different ways to get her NP back. I mean, she has like a 30% battery, a 20% battery. She sucks 20% NP from your allies every single turn. She's just absolutely insane. She even can control the enemy party's NP by reducing all of their NP by 1, and then she has a targeted NP drain as well for them. The taunting ability that she has, like normally you're like, oh, I'm worried about my servant dying, but she has a taunt while being a ruler, which makes her really strong. Really, the only thing that I kind of don't like is that she just has this Omni card buff of 20%. I'd like to maybe see like the quick buff get buffed up to like, I don't know, 30% or something, but that's just me being a little greedy, because she also just has stuff like her NP reduces all enemies quick resistance for 3 turns. So it's like, she really has everything she needs to be an effective servant. I'm just being a little greedy with how good she already is, and I want to just be even better, right? Because it's just never enough, right? So Karen's absolutely broken. This next guy, Dantes, this was a really hard one for me to rank. I decided on putting him in B+. Now, here's the reason I think it's weird, is that Dantes is primarily a farmer, but he still has good things going for him, like his Pierce Invincibility and a big 50% attack before a turn. He has 50% NP gain, which is really insane, obviously, for looping, but it's also really good if you want to bring him to like a boss fight or something, because it means he can help loop his own NP and kind of just keep slamming the boss with his strong hitting NP. But I don't know, just in that same regard, he does have like a debuff cleanse. He can drop 20 stars and suck up an enemy's NP gauge as well. Like those are things that kind of help him out in boss fights as well. But the fact that he's like primarily a farmer, it's just hard for me to really rank him on here, right? So it's like I'm kind of going back and forth, and I'm looking at his kit. His kit is getting a little dated, but he does farm really well. Like I can't throw that out there. So B+ is where I'm going. That's pretty much smack dab middle of the tier is B+ exactly. So I'm just going to leave him there for those reasons. You guys can argue in the comments down below whether or not, you think Dantes should be higher or lower, right? Depending on, like, how important you think farming and everything is. Because farming is very important. It's like 90% of the game. But it's also like, it's not like Dantes is the only quick looper anymore. You have other people like Karen, like Voyager, like Lancelot even, if you have him higher NP copies that can all kind of do the same thing he does. And so, while he's very good at it, it's, like, hard to justify him or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Jalter's, I'm putting her in A+, and this is one of the specific reasons I have things like the plus tiering, because I'm trying to not be biased, because you guys really know that I love Jalter a lot. I think she's, like, one of the most fun servants to use in the game, but I'm like, if I put her in S tier, is that my bias? I was like, I'll put her in A+. Like, A+ is basically, like, she's pseudo into S tier. I definitely can understand if you want to put a Jalter up there, because she pretty much does everything you would want a DPS to do. Her NP hits insanely hard, has the highest attack in the game. Her NP smacks the enemy with buff block, so they basically can't do anything for the first buff they try to apply to themselves. I mean, she's one of the reasons you can just easily cheese the Shi Huang fight in Lost Belt 3, because, you smack him with the NP, he tries to buff himself when he does the break bar and he can't do anything, and then he just turns into a wet noodle that you just kind of start poking with your crits. I mean, they buffed her NP, right? And they allowed her to drop 30 stars. Like, the NP was already really good with the damage it did and the buff block, but then they're like, nah, Jalter's not genning enough stars for herself. Let's just have it drop 30 stars on her NP, which is stupid broken. Her crit skill sets the standard for what other servants want their crit skill to look like, right? With the 50% crit damage for 3 turns plus the star weight. I mean, that's literally just the standard that you want every crit servant to live up to. They gotta have that at least 50% crit damage for 3 turns, and gotta have some star weight for themselves to absorb those stars. So that's crazy. She has a solid charisma that not only buffs her own damage, but if you have her with dragons, which for whatever reason she's not a dragon despite being the dragon witch, I don't get it. I don't know why FGO just didn't make her a dragon. Maybe they thought it would have been too broken, but if she's with dragons, she can double buff them for 40% attack. She has an invincibility to keep herself alive at the cost of 1000 HP, which, funny enough, when I was first getting into the game, people thought Jalter was bad because she sacrificed 1000 HP. I'm like, dog, if the 1000 HP is so bad, just use your Mystic Code on her, or just wait for Merlin to come out. Like, I was just like, I don't get it. Like, she's gonna obliterate whoever you're fighting in like 1 to 2 turns anyway. Like, who cares about 1000 HP? But it also gives her a Buster Mana Burst, which allows her to do some big boy cracked damage. So Jalter A+, definitely can understand if you want to bump her up to S tier. I have no problem doing that. Gorgon is actually also going to be going up into B+ as well. Well, not B+ as well, but you guys know what I'm saying. She's also one of these plus servants, because I think Gorgon is a bit better than people give her credit for, but I also think she's not as good as other people think. Like, Gorgon exists in this weird limbo state where it's like, people are like, oh man, she's like absolutely cracked, she's absolutely broken. But then it's like, yeah, she's good, but like, is she like that broken? And by the way, in the middle of here, just to make things a little easier for people that are gonna like try to take a screenshot or something, I'm gonna go ahead and add the plus tiers in here, just to help you guys out and help me out, just so it doesn't look like, oh, Jalter and Sherlock are next to Ruler Artoria. That's a little bit weird. Or like Gorgon is with these people. Like, I just think it's a bit better to kind of like show, yeah. Anyway, just doing that mid recording, but yeah. Her NP has a little bit of utility because it charges the entire party's NP by 50%. Not 50, 15%, my bad. She has a 4 attack buff that gives her 50% attack for those 4 hits. So that's really strong. At the bare minimum, that will give you like a full Brave Chain, right? Like, that'll give you like NP Brave Chain, which is super just strong. But it can also be like, you can use like your NP and a Buster card on turn 1, and then it allows you to use like another Buster card, like maybe an Arts card on the next turn. And that 50% attack buff is really gonna bite, especially because she has Buster Star Weight for that initial turn with a 50% 3-turn crit skill. Again, that's what I'm talking about with Jalter setting the standard, that even people like Gorgon are copying that. She has a 5-turn Guts, which is pretty strong, and then she has Petrification for 1 enemy, which I believe functions like the Bound skill as well. Like, all of these weird different stun skills should all function the same. I just kind of wish it was like her Babylonia skill, where it can stun the entire enemy party. But if they buff it to that, and then, I don't know, maybe have it like lower their defense or something, I think she'll be pretty insane and can comfortably sit in A tier at that point. On the other end, Lobo, C+. I mean, he has a few things going for him. His NP can pierce evasion, He gives himself a small 20% crit buff for 3 turns. That's at least something. He has a 30% attack buff for 2 turns. That's not the worst thing. He has a turn of massive star weight, which is, will help him make advantage with those crits that he's giving himself. He has an insta-kill meme, which I really don't care for, and he can remove enemies' buffs on a skill, which is also really nice. That's actually really good. It's part of the reason I was like gassing up Amakusa earlier, but he's kind of just, I don't know, he's very directionless. He needs a few more buffs to kind of get himself back on track. He's always just been this very odd servant, but like C+, he's usable. Like, you can use him. He's not gonna like really let you down. You can patch him up with double Scotty, I guess. So, C+, like, he's definitely a weirder servant. I don't really know what else to say. It's Lobo, dude. Like, what do you want me to say? Moving on more into the Avengers, we have Nobu over here, who's actually had quite the glow up recently. Now, I'm only putting her in A. That might be a sin to some people. Some people might be like, why is she not A+? I'll kind of just explain. She's on the right track, right? With her NP being pretty much the best NP to bring against divine enemies, because it slams them with the damage mod, and then it removes their defensive buffs before she attacks. So very similar to like Shirou Amakusa, how he removes like enemy defense, invincibility, dodge, and everything before he actually does damage. So not only does she just yeet all of their buffs, but then she just Tim Tam slams them into the ground with her damage mod against divines. She has a scaling attack buff that goes from 30 to 50 to 70% every single turn. So it builds up on that third turn is when you really want to do the most of your damage. She has an invincibility to keep her alive, and then also sticks that buff on there with a 100% buff removal resistance for that turn to ensure that that invincibility is not yeeted off, so she's going to keep herself alive. She can give herself the Burning Battlefield buff, and that when she has that Burning Battlefield up now with her 2 more recent buffs, that she gets a 50% special damage mod against sky attributes and a 3-turn 30% buster buff. That's also really nice. Then she also does have a 30% batter to keep herself consistent, but maybe I'm just being selfish. Like maybe realistically, I can say she's like an A+ servant right now, because Mao Nobu is definitely way better than people are giving her credit for. There's kind of this problem in the FGO community where, a servant will come out and they won't be very good, or they'll be a little lackluster, and then even after they get a whole bunch of buffs, people still refuse to accept that they're good. And I'm like, Mao Nobu, even if you thought she was like a B tier, C tier servant when she released, she's definitely very good now. Like, she does, and like, she's just a good DPS servant. And if you're fighting a divine enemy and you have Mao Nobu and you don't bring her, you're a fool, right? You're an absolute fool if you don't fight divine enemies with Nobu. She absolutely destroys them into the ground. Don't be a fool, bring your Mao Nobu. But it's just like A+, maybe, I don't know, because I'm comparing her and I'm thinking with Sherlock and Jalter also being up there, and I'm like, but do I think she's quite as good as they are? And maybe it's just this bias I've had, because every time that Mao Nobu gets a buff, I'm like, please just give her a crit damage skill. Please just give her the 50% crit damage skill that Jalter has. And she's, honestly, if she gets that, I'll slap her in S tier. I'm not even gonna lie to you guys. If she can get that, it's the one thing I feel she's massively lacking. I think she's completely fixed. So A tier for now. You give her that crit buff DW, S tier. You got it. Speaking of S tier, we have Space Ishtar. Do I really need to explain Space Ishtar? She's, okay, kind of like a better Dantes, if that makes sense, because while Dantes, I think, is very focused for farming and can kind of get some use out of challenge quests, Space Ishtar is just good everywhere. Like, the fact that she can be any card type, she can be a buster servant, a quick servant, an art servant, and she does fairly well in all of them, although her best class is definitely being an art servant. And just with everything that she does with the 50% battery, the fact that her NP buffs the extra attack, that's just like a little, thing I know DW did for me. She can make the party immune to charm, gives the party a 30% charisma, and then 20% for herself. She can keep herself alive with invincibility. I mean, she's just absolutely insane with everything she does. And then the fact that her third skill gives her a like an 80% chance to get an Omni card buff, just like in each one of those are separate 80% procs. It basically just means you can pop that third skill and be like, okay, what do I want to be with Space Ishtar? Oh, she got the Buster and the Quick buff. I can choose between those. Didn't get the Arts buff. Well, I'm just using her with Astraea anyway, so it probably won't matter all that much. So, does good damage, loops very well, good in challenge quests, just has a lot of generic buffs, which I do like, because since they made her like this character that can swap between her different card types, and they gave her the Omni card buff, they basically made it to where it's like, She works good with any of the supports. You can use her with double Scotty, although that's probably the hardest one to use her with. You can use her with double Koyanskaya. You can use her with double Castoria, and she just does good in all of those. She's probably one of the most valuable servants you could probably get into your box because she's just super flexible with what your box is able to do for her. Moving on to the next servant, we have Big Ushi. Yeah, this is not going to be a surprise. I've been pushing this servant pretty much ever since I started doing these tier list things because Big Ushi over here is, I don't know why they made her insane. Like, it was kind of this meme. People were like, oh, she's kind of like quick Jalter. I was like, dude, she's better than Jalter. Like, and this is coming from like the biggest Jalter stan. Like, she's absolutely disgusting. Her enemy does the Shirou Amakusa thing where she removes the enemy's buffs. She slaps them with big damage because of the thirst for revenge. What's thirst for revenge? Well, basically, she gives herself a guts, and then if she dies, she gets that buff onto herself. So it's like, you just let her die, she does more damage, right? Like, you don't, the enemy doesn't want to kill Ushi, right? She's immune to insta-kill as well. The guts is big at 3k. She also has 2 hits of evasion. So it's not like she even wants to die like someone like Hijikata. It's just like, if she happens to die, she's going to slam the entire enemy party. She obliterates Genji enemies for 200% special damage, which is actually abnormally high. That the 200% damage is usually overcharged level 5 on an NP. So even though Genji is a bit of a smaller set of servants, you see a Genji person, you bring Big Ushi because she's going to obliterate them, right? Every single time. She gives herself 100% crit damage for 3 turns and then lowers the party star weight except herself. Is just absolutely insane. So it's like, instead of the Jalter strategy of like 50% crit damage for 3 turns and big star weight for herself, she says no one else is getting crits, and then I'm giving myself 100% crit damage for 3 turns. Like, if they didn't want it to be any more blatant that they were trying to make a better quick Jalter, I don't know what else does. Because then they also gave her a 30% battery. Because why not? Like, literally, actually, why not? They literally just said, screw it, 30% battery. And you know what else? 30% attack buff for 3 turns. They just chocked her full of a bunch of just big attack buffs, and they have like 3 things that keep her alive. Like, Big Ushi is disgusting, right? I cannot wait for her to come out later this year because I wasn't planning on summoning for this servant, but I probably will anyway because she's disgusting. And I don't even have Scotty, if that tells you how good this servant is. I don't have Scotty, still summoning for this servant because I'll do Scotty, my 1 waiver, and Big Ushi. Right? I'll do that setup, or hopefully I pull Scotty during anniversary during the lucky bag. You know, you can hope for your boy on that one. Oh my goodness, what is that? Another S tier servant? It's almost like Avenger is a really strong class. So Kama, okay. Kama is kind of like Space Ishtar. I believe she does more damage, but she's not as good as looping. I believe that's the dichotomy they have, that Space Ishtar has the better NP gain, but Kama has the better damage. Actually, I have the damage chart right here. Let's just check this, you know? We're already going to be here for like an hour, right? We might as well check it, right? Like, let's just be accurate while we're here. So we have, yes, Kama does do more damage, and Space Ishtar is the one that does the looping better. Okay, that's why I just wanted to double check, because I was like, I want to make sure I'm not spreading misinformation, because, you know, if I do this hour-long video, someone's going to find something to yell at me about. But anyway, the NP does good damage. She lowers enemies' defense. Unfortunately, like I was talking about earlier, this does not proc first. She actually slams charmed enemies for a big special damage mod. The good thing is that she can actually apply charms to all enemies for a turn, so she can just put that on whoever she wants and gives them special damage mod. Which, the reason this is crazy is that, like, usually it's like you have to be fighting a specific enemy. You gotta fight someone that's divine. You gotta fight someone that's a Genji. You gotta fight a demon, something like that. Kama says, I just make everybody my special damage mod. I can put it on anybody I fight, which is super crazy, right? Because then you get the whole thing with special damage mods is that you can do an insane amount of damage, but it's specific. But for Kama, it's not. She can do it to anybody, and it's absolutely insane. And then she just has, like, standard good stuff, like the 50% battery, a 30% arts buff for 3 turns, Astraea, take some notes, dude, come on, that's what you want to see. 20% NP damage for 3 turns, that's also nice, because it just multiplies into her arts buff. 2 hits of evasion to keep herself alive, she's immune to charms, she's just very, very nice overall. She even has a nice, like, on-attack debuff that increases her damage when she attacks, so it's just, like, she's just crazy overall. Calm is definitely a very, very insane servant. Summer BB, going in A. Now, Summer BB, realistically, I could talk about everything else that she does. Like, she has the Jalter crit skills. She has 50% NP damage for 3 turns, which is insane, a 50% battery. But pretty much the entire reason that BB is in A tier is because of her third skill. Her third skill allows for so many just wombo combo degenerate strategies because it locks your cards in place. I know I've already explained in a few videos how cards work in FGO, but basically, every servant has 5 cards in their deck. Your deck consists of 15 different cards. If you get a set of cards that you like in that, you can lock it down with BB, and you can actually trivialize a lot of fights in the game. I mean, I know the last fight in Lost Belt 4, a lot of people were kind of like, oh, the tree versus and Ashvatama is super hard. Did you know that's secretly a farming node if you have Summer BB and Parvati over there? Even if you don't have your own Scotty, because I don't have my own Scotty, and I turned that into a farming node on stream. It was absolutely disgusting because it's just the ability to lock something as fundamental as the cards that are supposed to be like random every single turn in place is supremely powerful, right? It is just a godly tier skill, and it's no wonder we haven't seen anybody else do it, right? Like, they have not ever brought this back. She was a year 3 servant. We are in like year 7 right now. We're coming up on the 7th year anniversary. No one else has done this, right? Because it's absolutely broken. And then watch like the 7th anniversary like unit just be fully based around that. It's just like BB plus or something, I don't know, and she just does the same thing. But yeah, it's an absolutely broken skill, and she could pretty much just ride into A tier on top of that. It just helps that she has all of the other good stuff on top of that, so she's actually a decent servant at base with an absolutely broken skill. Then we have Jinako. Jinako I just kind of see as like a really good support moon cancer lady. Her NP gives her invincibility, kind of like Shi Huang. You can kind of try to loop it if you want to go through that headache, but her NP gain is not like the best. She lowers all enemies' defense by 30%, and it procs first, and it lasts for 3 turns. So if you can loop her NP, you can actually just severely neuter the enemy's defense, which is really nice. I really like her charisma because, you know, it's obviously charisma, 20% attack buff, but then it also gives everybody 5 stars every single turn. So you basically get 15 stars per turn because it gives it to each ally. And then it also just charges their NP gauge by 20%. She has a nice taunt with some DR. She can give herself another additional 30% attack buff for 3 turns. So with that and her charisma combined, she actually has a 50% just attack buff for those 3 turns, which is really strong. The only thing that I know that gets on people's nerves is that she has a targetable invincibility that also gives 30% NP gain for a turn, that also seals your skills for that turn. But my answer to that is just like, dude, forehead, just use your skills first, man. Just use your skills first. In fact, slap this onto Jinako herself. Getting the 30% NP gain while she has her taunt and she's invincible does mean she should be able to refund a decent bit of NP because she's just getting attacked and you're not taking anything from it. So shouldn't really be all that big of a deal. So that's why I can put her in B+, because like if her only real detriment is that she seals an ally's skills while giving them invincibility and NP gain, it's whatever, dude. It's not that big of a deal. Kiara I'm going to put in A. This is probably going to be the first like really hot take here because I know people really like Summer Kiara. I think she's good. That's why she's in A tier. I just don't think she's quite as broken as people make her out to be. She has an NP that deals bonus damage to enemies that have a mental debuff, which is obviously very good because it just means if you can like stun an enemy, charm an enemy, put them to sleep, any of those mental debuff things, you can actually gain access to her special damage mod. But the whole thing is that Kiara has this gimmick based on her first skill where she ranks up her other skills, and then you can kind of pay a certain amount of those buffs that she generates on her first skill to rank up her second and third skill and make them even stronger. The whole reason though that I can just put her in A tier is that I'm kind of just looking at Kiara with all of her base like level 1 skills, right? And I'm like, she's still very good if you have like all of her base level 1 skills. I'm not exactly the biggest fan of the whole meme. I think it's a very fun style of gameplay, but as an art servant, the whole thing is that you kind of want to spam everything. You don't really want to stall and wait around, so it just seems kind of counterintuitive to like what she actually wants to do. But if we just go over some of the things that she actually does do, even at like a level 1, is that she has a fat 4k guts, she has a debuff cleanse, She can refund her HP every turn. She has 20% NP damage for 3 turns. And then we look at some of her other skills. She at bare minimum has a 30% battery that can go up to a 50%. And then she can drop 20 to at least 30 stars depending on, her rank up. She can still give the party, just everybody in the party, 1 hit of evasion, which is very nice. She can remove enemies' sure hit buffs to make sure that they're not going to just pierce through the evasion she gave to everybody. Then she can remove, or not remove, but lower the enemy's party defense by 20 to 30% and their arts resistance by 20 to 30%. So even at some of those lower values of 30% NP, 20 stars, 20% defense and arts resistance reduction, those are all still very good, and I think that solidifies her into A tier. If you were just looking at her level 3 for all of her skills, she probably would be an A+, but I think something to make her a bit quicker, a bit more consistent would be buff the first skill and allow her to give herself like 2 of those right off the bat, and then she can refund those. That way she has access to the 50% battery right at the start, because that definitely opens up a lot for Kiara if she's able to do that. So yeah, that's just kind of some things I'm thinking about. I also, the third skill being a defense and arts down reduction does kind of hurt her ability to farm, because you obviously want to be able to have a buff that's going to last all 3 nodes, and this is more conducive to being a good boss and wave 3 killer. So not really holding it against her, but I'm just saying like that is kind of another problem that I've kind of noticed. But again, still a very good servant overall. I mean, she's an A tier. Don't crucify me down in the comments, man. But then we have Melt in A tier. This is probably also going to get me in trouble as well. Even though A tier is not bad, it's not bad at all. I just don't think she's as good as someone like Jalter. But I think one of the problems is that her NP does remove enemy buffs, but it does it after doing damage, which is kind of like, you have to waste all of that damage. You have to waste an NP to remove their buffs. That kind of sucks. If we can just buff that and make it proc first, I think Melt is like an S tier servant automatically, because it just feels like such a waste. She does stack 10% quick damage on her NP. For survivability, she gives herself 2 hits of evasion. She does lower her defense on her second skill, but who cares about that? Because what you actually get on that second skill is like 30% attack for 3 turns. And then every time she attacks for 3 turns, she stacks 15% crit damage, which can get out of hand very, very, very quickly. And then she also gives herself a 30% NP damage buff for 2 turns. So I just see her as like standard .jpeg, really good, quick single target servant. Like, it's kind of like if you want to make a single target quick servant, you kind of just build them to look like Meltryllis. She has good survivability. She can do some really good damage with the 30% attack and the 30% NP damage buffs. Those are very nice. She at least has some utility in being able to remove the enemy's buffs, even if it's unfortunately after she does damage. But then maybe you can argue, well, she can do some good follow-up damage, because at least now she has the crit damage skill where she can build up crit damage very quickly. So that all just makes her a very, very good servant. I would just like to see like maybe 1 buff tossed her way that kind of helps fix her up a little bit. And then somehow, I don't know how this happened, Melt is insane. Kiara from the same game is insane. How is Lip a C+ servant? Like, what does Lip actually do? Not a whole lot. Her NP doesn't really do anything. It has a nice heal, which is nice, but it's probably one of the more least important buffs that you're going to be giving in the game, because you want to be healing and doing other things. Like, if you're a healing servant, you want to be like healing and giving guts and giving NP gain and cleansing debuffs. You want to be like leaning into that support, but she's like wanting to be a healer, but then she also wants to be a tank with her damage cut, defense, and taunt, and then like this debuff immunity. But for one, you kind of have to use the debuff immunity to neg her own stun. And then when you look at her like DPS abilities, it's like 30% attack and pierce invincibility for 3 turns, which is a nice base, but it's not really enough. So it's like Lip is spread into 3 different areas, and she's not really excelling at any of those areas, right? Like, she's not really doing anything particularly well, which is really unfortunate, because I know she's really popular. I liked her in the CCC event, so I'm like, I would like her to be able to do more. And it's just like, come on, DW, let's throw some buffs her way, which they have already tried. They've buffed her second skill, but all it did was give her this buff whenever she falls below 50% HP, but it's like, if you're a tank, you shouldn't really be falling that low, especially when they buffed your NP to give you a big giga heal that makes it really hard to fall below 50% HP. So just have a lot of problems with the way that they've designed Lip, and it just, I don't know, they need to go ahead and try to fix Passionlip, because she needs a lot of help. So I hope that they buff her in the future, but right now she's sitting at C+. Kiara, on the other hand, again, I just don't get it. Like, you have Lip, Melt, and Kiara all from the same game, and like, what is this range, dude? Like, how can you make all these different servants, man? But Kiara, I mean, pretty much like the ultimate boss killer in the game. Don't think I need to spend too much time on her. I mean, the NP is packing an Omni Pierce with invincibility and defense being pierced, and has a huge 5 to 10k heal. You could argue that gets offset by her third skill, but keep in mind her third skill only takes 3k HP from her, and then it gives her a 50% increase in her healing ability, meaning she actually is offsetting the amount of HP taken away from her if you pump the third skill. Granted, you don't really need to use her third skill except for the invincibility, because everything else in there is pretty nice. I mean, like the 50% NP gain can help her loop for a turn. Like, I know I've been in a boss fight, I'd be like, oh, I really want to loop a lot of my NP, so I'm going to pop the third skill and just like loop for a second NP to finish out the fight. 50% crit damage for one turn as well. Like, that's all really nice on the third skill, although don't try to use her as a crit servant. She's not really built for that, but I mean, she does have that in the back pocket. She literally just does everything you'd want a boss killer to do. 50% battery for consistency. She sucks all enemies NP away by 1, removes all of their buffs, slaps them with a defense down, slaps them with an arts resistance down, lowers all of their debuff resistance by 100%, so all of these debuffs can go through. It just makes her really insane. And then, if all that wasn't just good enough, she has a passive buff against rulers. So basically, she's like one of the only people aside from Avengers that just obliterates rulers with absolute ease. So very nice. I love that they kind of threw that in there as like a lore thing. It just makes her very, very strong. Kiara's absolutely insane. It is true, you do want to try to get her to higher NP copies. That's really like her only weakness. But as someone who used NP1 Kiara for like a year and a half or something before I got mine, luckily, to NP3. I don't even know how that happened. You know, just got stupid lucky. But as someone using Kiara as an NP1, I think it's greatly over-exaggerated how much you need the higher NP copies. It's like, it makes her a bit better because she can do a lot more damage, but she's still boss killers. Like, she just obliterates bosses as easily, right? It just makes it an easier thing for her to do. Okita Alter, very similar to Mao Nobu. This is a servant that people were like really disappointed in, but she's pretty good now, especially after her buffs. So I'd like to see people stop hating on Okita Alter, because her NP, I think this is like just the next thing they should probably buff just to help her out a little bit. Maybe just make it changeable to quick. I'm just throwing a suggestion out there. If you guys want to hire me at Delightworks, I only bring good ideas. So, you know, we change this to quick and she's instantly an insane servant. But right now what she's doing is she's lowering enemy buster resistance by 40% for 3 turns. Now you might be saying, wait a minute, ZTL, I thought it lowered by 30% for 3 turns. Like, why are you saying 40%? Well, listen up, little Timmy, because her third skill got buffed and now gives her a 2-stage buff to her overcharge of her NP. So now she's just pretty much going to guarantee lower their buster resistance by 40% because of her ability to buff her own overcharge. I mean, aside from that, now she just has like really solid offensive buffs with a 30% buff to her quicken buster for 3 turns, a 20% attack buff for 3 turns. Or no, is it 3 turns? It's 3 times, my bad. Before someone clickety clacks in the comments are like, it's actually 3 times, not 3 turns. I corrected myself, all right? And then she has 30% NP damage for 3 turns as well. Like, all of those are really good because they all multiply into each other. The card buff, the attack buff, and the NP damage buff are all multiplying into each other to give her some pretty decent damage now. And she has a 30% battery to help her be a little consistent. Let's see that get bumped up to 50% maybe sometime in the future, Delightworks. Let's help her out just a little bit, because the 30% battery allows her to technically farm with Koyanskaya because of the append skill, but you're still probably going to be using servants with a natural 50% battery because they're easier and more preferable to use with Koyanskaya than having to use like an append skill to get around that. And then also to keep herself alive, they thankfully buffed her 1 hit of evasion to 2 hits, which does make her a bit easier to use and makes her not melt after like 2.5 seconds. So she's definitely doing a lot better than she was, but she's still a long way to go from being an S tier servant. So come on, Delightworks, hire me. Let's make this servant absolutely broken. And then we have Sithenai, which, again, like someone like Gorgon, I don't know why the servant is so controversial. Like, you either think Sithenai is the god of the game, like she's the best single target art servant that ever was and ever will be, or you think she's absolute dog water. And I'm just like, I just don't get it, bro. Like, I think she's fine. Like, B+. She's a fine servant. Her enemy, or not her enemy, the NP can lower an enemy's defense by 20% for 3 turns. Doesn't proc first, but that is a good effect. She can reduce enemy NP, but only if they're dragons. She has an invincibility to keep herself alive with some DR, and has a hit of debuff immunity, which is all nice for her survivability. She has a 30% arts buff for 3 turns, and a 30% battery, which are both nice for making her consistent and helping her just do a decent bit of damage. The only annoying thing, she has 2 80% chances for these 2 separate buffs. One is a 20% attack buff for 3 turns, and the other is to gen 10 stars every turn for 3 turns. If we can just make these guaranteed, I feel like people will just be more happy with her being a B+ servant, because getting the attack buff is nice. It multiplies into her arts buff to give her some pretty decent damage, especially if you've already fired an NP where you've lowered the enemy's defense. And then obviously getting the stars every turn as an art servant is super crucial, because art servants usually have a hard time genning their own stars, so that would just make it a bit easier for her just to live, right, and just do whatever she wants to do. So I don't know, Sithenai is not atrocious. She's not like a bane to FGO. Like, she's definitely fine. She's not atrocious. She's okay, right? Like, it's all right. Like, she's not S tier, but she's not D tier dookie garbage, right? Like let's not misunderstand. Then we can go to Kingprotea. Kingprotea, I just recently, I believe, did a video on her, so I'm just gonna kind of keep this brief. She does the stacky, right? Kingprotea, I think for everybody, her rating just varies depending on how much you like the stacky. Basically, she sits around, gets really beefy with the HP, gets really immune to NP damage, and then just kind of like steps on the enemy for like 7 turns until they die. If you like doing that, you probably are going to rate Kingprotea a bit higher. I recognize it as like a pretty viable form of gameplay. I know she's pretty good. I just don't think she's quite as broken, but she's definitely better than a lot of the lower tier servants. So just a quick review of her. Douman. Okay, Douman I actually do need to spend a bit of time on, because I know people are not as familiar with what he does. A+ for now. I may change my mind on it just a bit, but this guy is actually pretty dang good. Okay, so one of the things is that he has this weird curse meme. We're not really going to focus on that. But yeah, that's what his NP is all about, is just slapping enemies with curse. He has a 50% battery, and the whole name of the game is that he wants to be paired with evil and chaotic people. Now, thankfully, he is a chaotic evil person, so, well, I don't know if that's, don't clip that out of context, okay? Don't be like, thankfully, he's evil. Okay, let's not do that. But basically, he'll give himself a 40% attack buff and 100% crit damage, but those are 2 separate procs. It's 20% attack for evil and 20% attack for chaotic, and 50% crit damage for evil and 50% crit damage for chaotic, right? And so, since he's chaotic evil, he gets access to both of those. But if you compare him with chaotic evil people, you're just obliterating the entire enemy party. If you want to bring double Douman, say goodnight to the enemy. The enemy's going away. You know, they're getting obliterated. So he's definitely very good for that, because he can just burst down people. He can loop his NP as well. He's pretty good at doing that. He has a double guts, meaning his guts procs twice on a 5-turn cooldown, which is insane. And then he just has like this insane smorgasbord of nerfs that he hits the enemy with, as he hits him with a 20% attack down, 30% defense down, terror, which is the blue clock stun buff, and then confusion, which is the same thing except it seals enemy skills, which can prevent them from popping a random battery on you, popping a random survivability skill. It's just very nice if you're bringing him to boss fights. So Douman is definitely absolutely insane. Do I need to talk about Bizet? We just had her come out. She counters the enemy into oblivion. You can actually use her to farm, because all of the enemies that whenever it's their turn to attack, they try to attack Bizet, and she punches them for like 200k damage, and they just get obliterated. She just came out. Don't really feel like I need to talk about her too much, because she just came out. You can peep the video I just released on her, but just know the reason she's up here is she does insane counter damage and can pretty much be brought into any scenario, right? Like, she's absolutely ludicrous. Next, we have Abigail. Abigail I flip-flopped a little bit on. I originally had her in A tier, but I think I'm going to settle with B+, just because, again, B+ means she could be argued to be lower A tier. Abigail's kind of just like a generic good servant, right? Like, she's very, very good for most boxes, especially early on, but she's going to be one of those servants that, like, the better your account gets, the less likely you are to be using her, if that makes sense. Her NP removes enemy buffs, which is really good. She has a 30% battery now that also charges the party's NP by 10% every turn for 3 turns. She gives herself 30% NP damage for 3 turns. She can hit the enemy with Terra and reduces their defense by 20% for 3 turns. And she can reduce one enemy's NP gauge by 1 and their attack by 20% for 3 turns, which all of that is very, very good because it's like she can reduce their attack, their defense to buff the party's damage. Terra can help keep you guys alive. You know, 30% NP damage is very nice for just doing some flat out good damage. The battery made her a bit more consistent because, you know, genning her NP was kind of a problem. And then the buff on the NP is really nice. So she's just kind of like good servant, right? But I don't think she's like A tier good, right? Like, I think she's missing maybe like a buster buff, maybe an attack buff, maybe an extra thing on her NP. I think she's like, there's something that she's missing, right? Like maybe genning stars every turn as well. Maybe a crit buff would always be really nice for her. Just something along those lines I think would help kind of patch her up a little bit. Now, this is probably also going to be the third sin that people are not going to be happy about, but I'm putting Hokusai as well in B+ next to Abigail. I think Hokusai is good. Again, it's just B+ because I think it's arguable which one you could put her in, right? Like, I think you could flip-flop between either one. Her NP does let her obliterate man attribute people. She has a dodge, which is very nice in challenge quests to keep her alive. She has a 30% batter to help her be a bit consistent. She can drop 15 stars for herself and has 3 turn of star weight for her arts card. So that's really nice to kind of help her be a bit more consistent with the arts crits to help her refund her NP. She also has just a nice solid 30% arts buff for 3 turns, but the main gimmick with Hokusai is that she has an on-attack buff that every time she attacks an enemy with an arts card, she lowers their defense by 20% every single time. The only problem I have with this is that this kind of makes it to where you want to put the arts cards in front of the NP, which then hinders her ability to refund after firing the NP. So that's the only thing that I really don't like about the gameplay, because then it's just like, well, if you fire the NP and then the arts cards, you're sacrificing the NP's damage. And that's kind of like the main source of damage for like any servant, right? Unless you're like Super Orion or something, right? So it's just like, it promotes a very odd style of gameplay that I don't think is particularly good, but I think it's interesting, right? Like, I don't think it's the most horrendous thing I've seen. I mean, obviously there are worse people on here that do not have a very good style of gameplay, but yeah, leaving her in B+, I think is just the right decision for now, until they give her, like, maybe one more buff to, like, solidify her place up here. Same thing for Abigail. I think they kind of are in the same boat on that one. Then we just have this absolute nut job over here, MHXX. I mean, if you just want to obliterate an enemy, you bring MHXX. I mean, she has a 200%, I repeat, 200% special damage mod against sabers that is just free on her NP, so any sabers that exist, they get obliterated. She has a 50% special damage mod against threats against humanity. And who is that? Oh, it's like all the hardest bosses in the game. It's like all of the Lost Belt trees and all the super weird Cthulhu monster people that we're fighting. Oh, so she's good against all the tough people. That's really good to know. She gives herself 50% attack for 1 turn if that was enough. If you just needed her to do more damage. She pierces invincibility as well because, you know, nobody can run and hide from MHXX apparently. Her NP also gives her 20% attack, so if you have her 50% attack skill and you fire her NP, you have a 70% attack plus any special damage mods you might have, which again is absolutely insane. She has an invincibility to keep herself around in the fight and a 30% batter to make her even more consistent, even though she's already an art servant. She could drop 20 stars for herself, and I think the only unfortunate thing is that she reduces her own star weight for that turn, but it's just like, I don't know, dude, just gen more stars, forehead. I don't know if that's really the problem if you're not getting the crits. I mean, she doesn't even, like, I guess it's something that's holding her back. Like, she may be hard to get her own stars that she's dropping, and she's dropping with that skill, and she doesn't really have a crit skill. She can't, like, do, like, big crit damage. Maybe just give her 100% crit damage for 1 turn. Let's just do that, and let's just call it a day. But, yeah, MHXX is just absolute monkey DPS boss-killing servant. Then we have Yang. I did, again, just kind of do something on Yang, so I don't want to focus too hard on her, but I kind of see her as, like, the perfected version of these two. More so Hokusai, right? She's kind of like single-target Hokusai, and is one of just, like, the best boss-killing servants in the game, right? Aside from people like Kiara, because she can just burst down bosses like nobody's business. Basically, she can, like, suck up all the enemies' NP, she can reduce their defense, and then she slaps enemies with Burn, and then on her, her third skill with the Living Flame, and then her NP also applies that, and then she has a damage mod against burned enemies. Again, very similar to someone like Kama, where it's like, it's not based on, you know, the enemy having some special damage trait, Yang can do this to anybody. She can put burn on anyone as long as they're not immune to burn or something like that, or they don't have debuff immunity up. She can slam this on them, and then you can obliterate any boss with her. She's very good for bursting them down, so that's why she's this high in A+. Voyager over here, going in A tier. I don't know if I want to spend too much time on Voyager because his event is coming up in about a month or two, but I guess I'll just give a bit of a spoiler. I kind of see him as like the updated version of Dantes because he does a bit better and more content than Dantes does, even though Dantes can do more damage than he does and is able to loop just a little bit better because of his golden rule skill. But Voyager is still absolutely insane, as his NP refunds the party's entire gauge by 20%, and then if you are a living human, you get an additional 10%, which that's just icing on the cake. The fact that everybody gets the 20% is absolutely insane. Even though he has a lower NP gain, it helps him farm. Even if, you know, that's not enough, he has a 50% battery as well. And then, why not? He also blasts Sky attribute enemies with his special damage mod. And then he actually can get a bit of NP damage as well on his NP as well. For survivability, he has a dodge and 3 turns of debuff immunity, which is extremely nice. He can give an ally crit star weight, the entire party 30% crit damage, and then 20% crit star or critical damage resistance, which is very nice. The only thing that I kind of have an issue with is that he has, for one, a 20% quick buff, which is kind of low, but then it's also tied to being able to lower one enemy's quick resistance by 20% for 3 turns. And the unfortunate thing is that you want to pop this if you're going to start farming, but that means you also have to lose an additional source of damage on wave 1, which is a little annoying. But overall, I think Voyager is absolutely solid, and that's really the only thing I have against him. Abigail Summer, B+, she's going to be going up here. Just kind of an odd servant all around. Her NP removes all enemies' defensive buffs, but then she's kind of got like this weird sleepy time meme that she's going on about that I just don't think is like super great, because the whole sleep buff is like the enemies are stunned until you attack them, and it's just, I would just rather you guys made it a stun, right? Like, I just rather you guys just didn't do this weird new damage debuff thing. It's very odd. She can lower an enemy's defense by 50%, which is absolutely massive if they're asleep, but then it's like, what's the point? They're asleep for 2 turns, but then now you're just going to smack them with this defense buff that lasts for 1 turn just to wake them up again. Like, it's just very odd. Like, Abigail Summer is really weird. Like, she has good things going for her. That's the problem, is that, like, her NP is good. Removes all the enemy's defensive buffs. That's insane, right? Removing invincibilities, dodges, defense buffs, all that stuff is really good. 50% battery, lowering enemies' bust resistance, but, like, it's just, I don't know. I can recognize that she has good things, but she needs to get something a little bit better to help her just, I don't know, kind of hold up to the competition. I think in the essence of time, because I'm looking at the recording and I'm feeling my throat dying, I'm going to go ahead and put the S tiers up where they belong real quick and just kind of like blast past them. Van Gogh, Koyanskaya, and then I know people are going to make fun of me because I always mispronounce Oberon's name, or Oberon. Oberon, I don't care. I'm calling him Oberon. How about that? Ferryman. How about Fairy Tale? How about Natsu? That's his name. Basically, she is a supreme quick buff type person. Basically, you can just look at her NP and it's actually just insane. Especially if you're pairing her with anybody that's a foreigner. She gives like an attack buff, stars, everything over there. Absolutely insane. I mean, she literally plays a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! With spell counters, except they're actually curse stacks and FGO. And then she just can give anything from a fat battery, a guts, party dodge, just reducing the enemy's quick and defensive buffs down. Like, there's just so much she does. Gassing up the parties, or the like one ally in particular's attack. If you want a different flavor of Scotty, Van Gogh is definitely your girl to go to. She's absolutely broken. Koyanskaya of the Dankness is pretty insane because her, like, she just does so much. Like, I honestly see her as like the pair for Koyanskaya of the Light. Is kind of how she was made, because she kind of just does all of the opposite things that Koyanskaya of the Light doesn't do. I mean, with her ability to overcharge an ally's NP stage by 2, give them an on-attack buff that lets them drop 5 stars every time they attack with a Buster card. If they are an animal person, they get 30% attack and defense as well. She can lower what is it called? She can buff the entire party's buster performance by 30%, give them all a 30% battery. I mean, she has a passive wild beast damage mod of 20%, and then she can also, every time she attacks a wild beast, she has a 20% chance to hit them with buff block. It's just absolutely insane. She has a special damage mod against earth enemies. I mean, she pierces invincibility, has 50% crit damage, and then she just hits enemies with every debuff in the game. So, like, are you using her with Yang for whatever reason? I mean, well, she can hit them with Burn, right? Are you pairing her with someone that does special damage mod against cursed enemies? Congratulations. She can slap them with Curse as well, right? Like, she's just absolutely stupid, dummy, insane, right? Like, I don't know, she's just really dumb. Like, especially if you're going to pair her with Koyanskaya. Now, Oberon over here, he has a lot of weird things going for him. Like, he's not bad. He's definitely really, really strong. And I think people, like, look too much at a lot of the bad stuff he's doing, and they don't consider, like, how broken he is in the game, right? Because basically, if you want to boil down what he's doing, essentially, he's making the Buster meta the best meta right now, because Koyanskaya with her Buster looping can compete with Castoria, but Castoria doesn't have a finisher like this guy. You don't have someone you can just plug suit out, have Oberon just gas up their Buster and NP damage, and just turn them into a nuclear bomb to finish out the final wave or the final break bar of an enemy. I mean, the dude is just absolutely nuts, right? Like, in his ability to kind of put the crown on the Buster meta right now. It's like there's no equivalent to him for arts and quick. Like, what he does for the Buster meta is absolutely insane. Like, he's just that missing piece, right? Like, the fact that, like, he can come in there and then just dump 50% battery on them as well. It's just like, oh, I'm sorry, you were like a 30% battery Buster servant, you were having trouble. Oh, let me just plug suit in real quick, drop my 50% battery on you real quick, and then just gas you up to absolute absurd proportions. Oh, I'm sorry, you're not an NP5 servant, you're only NP1. Well, doesn't matter. You're going to do some NP5 damage real quick, aren't you, buddy? I'm just going to gas you up real quick. Oh, you're going to be like basically a wet paper towel after you fire this NP. Doesn't matter. The game's over. We won the farming node. We just obliterated the boss. Doesn't matter. So it's like, Oberon is absolutely insane. He's absolutely insane for what he does for the Buster meta, and I'm pretty sure I don't have to justify it because I'm pretty sure everybody's already seen like 700 videos of what this guy can do. Jacques de Molay, gonna go ahead and slap her up in A+. She's just a really solid, strong servant. I mean, her NP stacks 20% NP damage every time she fires it on a 3-turn cooldown. She can loop fairly effectively. She can curse the enemy party and then take advantage of that with her 50% special damage mod against cursed enemies. She has a strong charisma that gives the entire party 30% crit and a 20% battery, and it turns them, everybody except her, to evil alignment, which has a little bit of weird ties with other people like Moriarty and stuff as well, and people like Ashia Douman, which Molay and Douman are both quick, so I guess you could bring some chaotic good person, turn them evil, and then now, boom, you can start abusing Douman's buffs as well. She has an invincibility for herself, and her evil allies get 1 hit of invincibility, but oh, would you look at that, she can turn everybody evil, so it doesn't matter. She has a 30% battery plus the 20% on her charisma. That basically means she has a 50% battery. She can gen 10 stars per turn, and she gives herself a 20% quick buff, which is just a nice little cherry on top of everything she's doing. She's definitely a very, very strong servant. Pretty broken, if I do say so myself. And then finally, we have Hephaestion. This is kind of like a hard one for me to rank because she has a lot of like really broken stuff. I mean, like, first of all, if we look at her NP, she lowers the enemy's Buster and Arts resistance by 10% for 3 turns. So basically she's stacking that every time she fires her NP. And then you look at her overcharge and she's like, oh, she just gives herself a little like 10% NP damage buff. But then she also has a passive 10% NP damage buff. So that's actually like 20%, which is actually pretty good. Then to take advantage of her lowering the enemy Buster and Arts cards, she buffs her own Arts and Buster cards by 30% for 3 turns. She has a special buff that essentially just makes her a rider, right? Because she takes less damage from casters and then does bonus damage towards them. She has a 120% battery for like actually no reason. Like there was actually no reason to give her a 120% battery. Like 50% would have been absolutely fine, but I don't know. I guess they were like, no, I mean if we're gonna do like Iskandar but a lady, we're just gonna have to make her absolutely dummy broken. We're just gonna have to give her 120% battery. That basically means you can pair her with any CE or anything you want in the game, and she'll just absolutely pop off with it. So yeah, then you kind of like close out with her having like a taunt with 50% defense, which is always like really nice. Because that basically means like the turn that she's like taunting people, she actually can hold it down with the 50% defense. And the 30% NP gain that she gives herself does mean that she kind of functions like Gareth, although Gareth has a specific buff that specifically buffs the NP gain when she's getting attacked. So it makes her a little better for that, but it still functions very similarly. And then I guess she can like also just absorb the party's curse debuff. So yeah, Hephaestion's pretty nutty. I mean, especially if you're going to use her for farming, you can take advantage of that NP gain skill plus the 120% battery, and you can pretty much just loop whatever you want. But, alright boys, my voice is essentially dead. I hope this has been a very entertaining video for you all. I've been here for an hour and 10 minutes, so if you stuck through all of this, please leave your boy a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. You can support me by going down in the description down below and downloading LD Emulator. Very good way to play FGO or just any mobile game on your computer. You can join my Loot Cakes Alliance down in the description down below. Basically, anytime I or anybody in my alliance spends money on FGO, we all get points for it, and we can use those points to buy like gift cards and stuff like that. I think I'm like really close to getting one for Taco Bell or something, so that's gonna be a pretty sweet if I do say so myself, or maybe I'll just have to get a Google Play card or something. I don't know, because Castoria do be coming up. So very good for a lot of that stuff. The bigger that alliance gets, the faster we can all get our gift cards and everything. And you guys know we got some big spenders in there. So even if you're free to play, you can still at least get some benefits for, just kind of passively being in the alliance and checking your loot cakes every now and then. So I think that's, pretty sick. My Twitch is linked down in the description down below as well. If you guys would like to come check me out playing FGO on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, or Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, or just something Yu-Gi-Oh! Related on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But yeah, with all that being said, I can't feel my throat anymore. I feel like I'm going to die, so I'm going to go take a fat nap. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.